In this video, I'm going to describe how to create a database table in the local database. I'll be using the SQL connection class again to open the database, and then I'll use a class called SQL statement to encapsulate an SQL command and execute it against the local database. For this demonstration, I'll use the application createtable.mxml that you'll find in the Chapter 09 Begin project. If you're following along with the exercises, you can open this application now. In this version of the application, the code to open the database has been moved into a function named OpenDatabase. As in the earlier video that opened the database synchronously, I use an SQL file object to define the location of the database as contacts.db on my desktop. Then I create an SQL connection object and open the database. That function is in turn being called by a function called createNewTable, and that's where I'll execute the new code. Place the cursor in the createNewTable function, and then make a little bit of space after the call to open database. The first step is to create an instance of the SQL statement class. Declare a local variable named stmt for statement, data typed as SQL statement, and instantiate it using the SQL statement class's noArguments constructor. Next, set the statement object's SQL connection property to the connection that's already been opened. stmt.sqlConnection equals SQLCon. The next step is to add a text property. The statement's text property is the SQL statement that you want to execute. I'm going to use some data definition language to create a new table named person. The code will look like this. stmt.text equals, then I'll add a command to create a table. I'll add a clause named ifNotExists. This means that if the table I'm about to create already exists, I shouldn't recreate it. Next, I'll put in the name of the table and an opening parenthesis. I'll close that literal string and then add a plus operator to concatenate to the next value. Now I'll add each of the columns one at a time. The first column will be the primary key, named person ID. Each column gets the name, a data type, and any modifiers. For the primary key, I'll use an integer column. I'll declare that it's going to be the primary key, and also that it's an auto-incrementing column, so that as I add new records to the database table, if I don't indicate a person ID value, the database will simply assign the next available value. It's worth mentioning that SQLite allows you to add explicit values to primary key columns even if they're marked as auto-increment. That isn't the case for all databases. I'll put in a comma, close this string, and add a plus operator, and go to the next line to add the next column. The rest of the columns are all going to be string values, which in SQLite, as implemented in AIR, is a data type called simply text. So each database column will have a name, the first one will be first name, and a data type of text. The next one will have a data type of last name, and a data type of text, and so on. Now to speed up this operation a little bit, I'm going to clone this line of code. In FlexBuilder and all of Eclipse, you can hold down the Control and Alt key on Windows or the Command and Alt key on the Mac and press the down cursor key, and that will copy and paste that line of code. I'll create a bunch of column definitions and then go through and change their names appropriately. Street address, city, state, email, and phone. That'll be the last column, so I won't put in a comma. Instead, I'll put in a closing parenthesis. And then I'll close the ActionScript statement with a semicolon. Now I'll execute the statement. For any SQL statement, you simply call the SQL statement object's execute method. There are some optional arguments, including managing fetching order and item responders. If you're familiar with how to use item responders, for instance, when using RPC components, such as remote object, you can use a similar architecture here. For this demonstration, though, because I'm working synchronously, I'll simply call the execute method with no arguments. Every time you call the execute method of an SQL statement, it generates an internal result object. You can retrieve the result object as a class named SQLResult like this. var result, data typed as SQLResult, equals, and then you call the statement object's getResult method. Finally, I'll add a trace statement and indicate that the table was created. I'll save the changes, and I'm going to place a breakpoint right here at line 36, where I'm executing the trace method. This is after I've executed the statement and retrieved the result. This will allow me to debug the result object. I'll run the application in debug mode, click the Create Database button. That will take me to the breakpoint in FlexBuilder, where I'll open the Flex debugging perspective, and then double-click on the Variables tab to inspect the data. And take a look at the SQLResult object. The SQLResult object will differ in its content depending on what kind of SQL statement you executed. For instance, when you're creating a database table, the data property of the SQLResult object is null. On the other hand, if you retrieve data, the data property will refer to the returned data. Similarly, if you were to execute an insert, an update, or a delete, the rows affected property would be the number of rows that were affected by the operation. When you're executing data definition language statements such as a create table command, the rows affected property returns 0. So this is how you can find out what happened after an SQL statement was executed. I'll restore the size of the variables view and then click to resume the operation, and in the console view you'll see the message table was created. This database now has a single table named person. It has the same structure as the database that I demonstrated earlier in this video series, the contacts database that was built in MySQL. And in a later video, I'll talk about how to replicate the data from the network database hosted in MySQL and make copies of that data in the local database using simple insert statements.